project management is the secret discipline to connect a vision with an output and hopefully with an outcome and hopefully with an impact. And it's a combination between menial attention to detail versus holistic understanding of strategic principles and oversight. And I was always kind of a hands-on guy. So that's what I love about project management. It's you have to roll up your sleeves somewhere along the line. It's not just about, hey, I say you do.
Hi, welcome to the Project Management Matters podcast. I'm so excited to be with you today, and we have a special guest with us, Mark Engelhardt. Welcome on board, and thanks for joining me on this great episode. I look forward to exploring a whole range of topics. As you know, this podcast explores topics in project, program, portfolio management, PMOs, and everything in between. So, Mark, welcome, and let's get started.
Well, thank you for having me, Philip.
This is your chance to do most of the talking because last time we had the session, I was the one that was being interviewed. And I think that with your podcast, you end up hosting a lot of people and driving much of the discussion.
That's very kind of you. My number one negative feedback I have from good friends of mine, they say I talk too much on my own podcast. I said, yeah, because I like talking. No, just kidding. Yeah, no, but it's nice to be on the other end. It's nice to have somebody else who has to worry about the flow and the feeling and all those quality aspects of the podcast. It's nice to just jump in and not have to worry about the backbone stuff.
Absolutely. I think that we had a lot of fun doing the episode on PM Cowboy.
Yeah, it was a blast.
And the podcast is great. You just hit a major milestone. I think it's appropriate to start there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the podcast, where the idea came from, and what you've seen over the past few months with it, and then we'll get started from there.
Maybe a little bit about my background that kind of leads into this. I think everybody's born with a certain knack or with a certain skill set or with a certain inclination. And one of my inclinations is I've never been afraid of a stage. I've never been afraid of telling a story. And my two majors, bachelor's and master's, are in business administration and marketing. So I never really very often practiced the role of a marketing manager, but I always used marketing in everything that I did because I realized that communication is what ties people together. I was in project management. So I think one of my biggest marketing endeavors that I ever had to do with was with the PMI chapter, where for 10 years I was basically the master of ceremonies and tap danced and make presentations and brought communities of practice together. But after my time with the PMI chapter here in Vienna, Austria, that I founded, I wasn't burnt out. I was still doing consulting gigs and trainings and stuff where I had, I guess, stage exposure in a smaller content. But a lot of the people that I knew from my PMI community days, and also a lot of the people I met in my consulting gigs, would say, Mark, you know what? We like your stories. We like your knack of putting knowledge into interesting context. Why don't you write a book, or why don't you do this? And we don't hear enough from you. So I've been listening to this for years. And then somewhere along the line, I said, with the ease of social media, I said, well, everybody, if every moron can do it, I guess some smart people can try to do it. I don't know which end I belong to. You can make the choice yourself. But I said, why not get out there? And originally, when I started off with the podcast, it was really to try to create a kind of personal brand, have fun with it, be very straightforward in what we talk about, be engaging, don't have a stick up your wazoo, and really say it as it is. And that's how the PM Cowboy podcast began. It was kind of a way for me to stay in touch and remind people that I'm still active in my network. So that's where it started off. Exactly 40 podcasts ago. It's hard to believe
That's
it's
quite an accomplishment.
Yeah. So that's kind of the background story of the PM Cowboy, and I've fallen in love with the subject matter. My film crew, who without them my show wouldn't be hardly as engaging, at least visually. they somewhere along said, we love doing this with you, but do you have some kind of business concept behind this? Is there any kind of for-profit angle on it? And the answer was indirectly. Indirectly, it's what I call permission marketing. I want to get information out there, but I don't like to get into people's faces and say book me. But I thought this was a subtle way of reminding people that I'm still out there. So that's kind of the story behind the PM podcast. And you know what I love doing, and I think a lot of my colleagues and you as well who do podcasts, it's a great way to engage and do what we do from our own personality, to do it formally online and have people watch
I agree.
it.
I think that for me, what is really great is an opportunity to connect with you,
Yeah.
not just on a professional level, but personal level, to get to know a little bit more than just, this title and that title and the story. And I want to get into that. You've alluded a little bit about your background. Let us kind of zoom back a little bit more, because I think that you do have a unique story about how you got started, and in a very unique space, how you got introduced to project management. Talk a little bit about that with your, perhaps even as far back as your childhood. I think that's an interesting story.
It's funny that you mentioned that. And like I said, you're actually one of the few people that I've ever aired this subject matter with. I mean, most people, when they ask me when did I start off with project management, I use a professional context. But to be honest, I was loosely aware of the concept of projects when I was with Boy Scouts of America as a young teenager. And the American Boy Scout system has a ranking system that goes all the way up to Eagle Scout. Being an Eagle Scout is a big deal, and I'm very proud to be an Eagle Scout. And to become an Eagle Scout and the ranks before that, to achieve that, you have to do social projects. So I was already in love with the concept of identifying a challenging and interesting goal and working hard collaboratively to achieve it. And back then there was no concept, what's a project charter and how do I plan the stuff. We kind of did it shooting from the hips, but that was actually my beginning in project management.
I mentioned to you the other day that while I wasn't involved as a boy in Boy Scouts, I was involved as a parent. My son is an Eagle Scout, and I was a
Congratulations.
Scout
Mashallah.
master.
Yeah.
One of the amazing things that I learned about Eagle Scouts in particular is that only 4% of those who participate in scouting end up attaining that rank. So it's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah.
And as you said, that the projects within the Eagle Scout sphere, one of the things that they insist on is that you're actually acting as a leader and as a project manager. It's not a one-person project where you go and do it on your own, but you're actually leading the troop or leading the team.
And they're not paid, and you have to motivate them, you have to recruit them.
Exactly.
And you kind of get to test your theory of leadership, because it's not commando bay. People who volunteer have, you have to be able to know how to engage them. Yeah.
Indeed. And we have a lot of PMI members and volunteer leaders who have been Eagle Scouts. Jim Snyder, one of our founders, perhaps considered the father of PMI, was an Eagle Scout, and he was a big fan of Boy Scouts and the engagement of that program. So it's a great story, and thanks for sharing that with us, Mark.
If I can throw out this loose idea that's probably not mine, but it's one that I've been carrying around with myself. I'm still very fond of my years in Boy Scouts, and I think shout out to Pierre Leman, CEO from PMI. Maybe he can find somebody who might actually reach out to Scouting America, because I think the best place to start with project management education is when they're young. So I think there would be a great, also with PMI's new focus on green projects and social projects, that might be an interesting place to recruit
especially
early.
The element of sustainability, I think, is a major theme in scouting. So I think that's an interesting angle from the PMI Next strategy. It could be something that's exciting for us as a profession and for PMI as well. So I agree with you. So let's continue along that path. Share a little bit more about your rich background, because I think that with you being based in Austria and having that multicultural background, tell us a little bit more about that and how you got engaged in the international business side, not just simply managing project in a single domain or a single country.
Well, I'm a confusing person for people who like to figure out what nationality you are and put you in a box. Because for many people, if they see me and listen to me, they say, "Oh, you're the poster child American," which in many ways I'm proud of people saying that, the positive American, the good American. And then I have some people who know I've been living in Europe now for a very long time said, "Ah, shut up, you're not American, you're actually Austrian." Um, I'm not your typical American, and I'm not your typical European. I'm a blend, and I was very fortunate, and this is of no achievement on my part. I was the child of an expat family back in the day when being an expat was not quite as common as it is today. There was a smaller group of people that traveled the world for multinational companies, and my father was one of them. We moved, by the time I was 18, we had moved 14 times and lived in 11 different countries. And I don't say that to impress anybody, but it's something I'm incredibly proud of because if anybody were to ask me of all the BS letters I have behind my name, which education am I most proud of? Two. One, that I got to travel early and I got to see the world, which is a wonderful, beautiful place. I don't think you can really appreciate cultural diversity until you've really lived in it. And my parents were big fans of integrating into the cultures that we lived in. So that was a great experience. And the second thing that formed my childhood was the fact that my father was in upper management, and what I learned from him, both positive and negative, as far as management and leadership, in particular in decision making. He was a sensational decision maker who was not afraid of anything. No MBA school will teach you. You'd probably have to have multiple years of mentorship from a very successful person, and that's kind of where it started off. So I went after being overseas for a long time. I went back home to study and get my bachelor's. I consider Texas my home, although I was born in the Northeast. And I did my first formative years in the United States, working initially in sales and marketing, then moving to operations, then slowly slipping into project management, consciously, unconsciously. And then eventually I said, you know what, I missed working international. I just love it. I love working with multinational teams, you know. That's just, the world is too rich and I love my own culture as well, but I love people you just see so much more, you feel so much more, you sense so much more. So that's kind of a little bit about my international
I think
background.
with the people who grow up in an expat environment, having been one myself, as someone who worked
Yeah,
as
we
an
have a similar
expat, I didn't
background.
grow up as an expat, but I hear this from my kids and their friends, is that the concept of home, if you end up moving home, it almost feels small. And
Yeah.
that's applicable regardless of where home that might be, whether it's home in the US, Europe, the Middle East, whatever that might be, it feels different because when you're growing up, especially in an expat environment, you're exposed to so many cultures, and perhaps you develop certain skills, especially on the soft side of skills of leadership, like empathy,
Yes.
that you may not typically experience in a homogenous type of
Cultural
environment.
appreciation and diversity, embracing diversity, which is in some cases I think is being pushed back on right now at this stage. I hope that it'll change again. But that's the real wealth. The real wealth of you can look at it from a culinary perspective. Some of the best dishes are the ones that have a variety of spices and ingredients. So
Yeah, and I think that the concept of culture, at least for me, as I learned more about it, is that we don't really live in isolation. You find that culture is a fusion,
yeah,
and certainly when you look at language, you find that so much of our vocabulary in many languages is borrowed from others,
yeah,
and it's a rich history of that as well.
absolutely. Yep.
So let's talk a little bit more about project management. You've been involved in project management for a while as a professional. You've
Mhm.
got a very rich and a great deal of accomplishments in project management as a consultant. And start with what keeps you excited about project management, and then walk us back to how you got started and a little bit more about your journey in project management.
Oh, you're gonna make me get philosophical. One of the things that attracted me about marketing and also product management was where I began was the concept of shaping the future. the whole concept of product mix and diversification, and the whole concept of financial and product portfolio, which eventually led me to project portfolios. I just thought was fascinating. Regardless of my age or my seniority in management, I always wanted to be somehow involved with the shaping of things. I was, I did some very basic jobs as well, anything from washing dishes to the more menial things. But although I have a profound respect and I wouldn't want to miss that, I always said, if I want to be able to contribute. And for me, project management, I'm going to get a little philosophical here, is the missing link in management thinking. Okay. I think most people understand the concept of having visions or being able to formulate missions. We're all great at those one sentence, I want this. And if you look at it from a spiritual basis, the most religious documents say in the beginning there was the thought. People are great at thinking, sometimes. And the next thing after the thought was the word. Everybody's good at using words. You just have to go into social media. There's an inflationary amount of people who have something to say. But then if you look at the success rate of projects, if you look at between what was said and what ended up, there's a huge gap, and that gap is filled by project management. Project management is the secret discipline to connect a vision with an output, and hopefully with an outcome, and hopefully with an impact. And it's a combination between menial attention to detail versus holistic understanding of strategic principles and oversight. And I was always kind of a hands-on guy. So that's what I love about project management. It's you have to roll up your sleeves somewhere along the line. It's not just about, hey, I say you do.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I remember from my PMI board days is that we used to say that project management is the best kept secret in business, and PMI is the best kept secret in project management. But it's interesting to see the growth of the profession over the past 20 or so years. And I'm sure, with you being involved in PMI and with local chapters, you must have seen that as well. What got you involved in a volunteer capacity, and what was it like, being on the forefront of just kind of engaging professionals and advocating for project management?
I know I'm going to tie in some of the conversations you've had in your Substack in the last couple of days. If you haven't seen Philip's Substack, you do. He's prolific and amazing. He picks all the right topics and he engages people on an international level in a wonderful way. So there's a couple things. One, the concept of, did you become a project manager accidentally or intentionally? You were actually one of the few people of our generation that, that pretty much from the beginning, from the get-go, was in project management. I on the other hand, belonged to the old OG cast of project managers that kind of slipped into it. We learned how to swim because we slipped and fell into the deep end. Or actually, we didn't fall into the deep end. We fell into the short end first. So my entry into project management began with being an ambitious line manager with the title High Potential. There were 50 other ones who had the same title, and it was kind of a shark tank of young managers that were jockeying to see who could get attention, who could prove how good they were, so they could get promoted, right? And our senior management was really, really good at encouraging this. This is how they basically facilitated Kaizen, or continuous improvement, is to constantly have open discussion with us, and challenges. What can you add to the overall portfolio? And we would come up with all sorts of good ideas, and senior management would say, Mark, that's a great idea, do it. And that was basically the mandate. Did we really call it a project back then? Sometimes not. But most of these projects were flash in the pan projects, 5 kilo projects with a small team, small budget, or a non-existing budget, and you did something wonderful, and if you did a good job, you got a pat on the head, and maybe you got a bonus. But if you did 5 kilo projects long enough, you got bored, and then you got 10 kilo projects and 20 kilo projects, and then you got a reputation, and you would get on senior management's nerve because you would be full of yourself a little bit. And they'd say, and then basically this was the senior management mentoring approach. Number one, we have to challenge them for further growth. So we have to give them a bigger project. And the second thing is we need to humble them a little bit by giving them a bigger project,
A
right?
harder
Yeah,
project.
yeah. So I went from like 20 kilo, 50 kilo projects to 500 kilo projects, 100 kilo projects. And that's the first time I realized, that this is not for the faint of heart. I mean, anybody can manage a project, but not everybody can manage every project, and I think that's important to understand. I eventually got so enamored with and felt so much in love with the change element of project, making a difference, that I slipped completely out of my line function and moved completely into projects. I eventually moved to Europe and applied in an IT company for a marketing position because that's what was open. And they said, when they interviewed me, they said, well, that position's already taken, but we're kind of enamored with your CV. You're all over the place, and most people wouldn't know what to do with it. It's kind of eclectic. But we would think, you would fit into this great role in this new department which we're creating. And the name of the department is called a Competence Center for Project Management. Okay, this was 1996 or something like that, right? And I was like, what the hell is that? And, project management, is that even a discipline? I thought it was just management, whatever you do. I got my first formal training back then, and I had my first aha experience, and I fell in love with it from then on. I mean, I already loved it beforehand, but now I knew what the name of the thing that I loved was. My first aha experience was I wish I would have known a lot of this stuff earlier. A lot of this makes sense. Having a framework, understanding foundational concepts, having a equipped toolbox is important for a project manager. And then what I did is I started looking around. I kind of had the imposter syndrome. I felt, here I am. I'm a trained project manager. I have the name consultant, and I'm supposed to be outsourced to clients, but I don't really feel comfortable because a lot of the projects that were out there were technical ones, IT projects. It was before 2000 when there was a huge influx of IT projects. And the first project I got assigned to after I got trained was not a 5 kilo project. It wasn't a 10 kilo project. It was a 300 million euro project. Okay. In banking, which I know nothing about or very little about. It was in IT, which I know even less about, just what I learned in college, right? And I was assigned to be a project office manager, right? I didn't even know what that was back then. And at that time, I kind of had a huge imposter syndrome, and I felt, well, isn't there a group of peers where I can find a mentor, where we can share experiences and stuff like that? And there was a very well-established PMI subsidiary here in Austria that had regular meetings of the same 100 to 200 people, but it was very exclusive, which was another subset topic that you have. Should the should PMP be exclusive? No, it shouldn't. But anyway, so I was looking at it and I didn't feel comfortable. They didn't want me and I didn't feel comfortable. They were like, yeah, you have to grow up and stuff like that. So I started looking, what else is there? And as an American, I found out there was an American option, PMI, and I tried to create the chapter and find a senior project manager who would then become president. And I couldn't find anybody who was willing to do it. And this is where I'm always going to give PMI credit for. They said, Mark, shut up, do it. I'm like, yeah, but I'm a junior project manager. They said, shut up. Based on what we've been talking to, just do it. And that's exactly how I got into it. And it was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience that it completely accelerated my learning, gave me exposure to all the people that I wanted to meet. We had Tom DeMarco as keynote speaker. We had the former Chancellor of Austria as a keynote speaker. I think the first event we had 200 people. The next largest one was 400. The next largest one was 650. And the largest event that we've ever had, I think it was 2007, was an event that had 36 expert tracks, 7 expert seminars. We had an award ceremony, and there were 1,200 people there over 200 days. So these are all things. I wouldn't say this is what I brought to PMI, but the combination of somebody who's willing to learn and share with a platform that is built for it. And if you're a little bit creative, and that I am, I have a little bit of a marketing knack. I'm not afraid to get up in front of 1,000 people. That's how I got started in PMI. And it's been the benefit because especially back then when the PMBOK, you still remember the original PMBOK was like this big, and then you had a compendium of 14 books or something like that to add onto it. Um, a lot of people would read the PMBOK and say, this is overkill. I don't do all this in my project. And I go, I do. I do it all. There isn't a single process in here that I haven't actually lived. And that was a beautiful experience is to while I was practicing, also learn it from what I consider to be the gold standard. And I've been a big advocate and supporter of PMI ever since.
Yeah, it's what's great about this period that you've described is that if you look at the PMI membership, that was probably the starting point was below 40,000. I think when I joined PMI, it was like 36,000 and several less PMPs. And now, fast forward, you're talking about 1.5 million PMP certified individuals. So the growth speaks for itself. One aspect of this that's very fascinating to me is the fact that, if you were wearing a polo shirt or a t-shirt that had PMI's logo on it on a plane, for example.
I have a couple of those.
Yeah, probably, most of the people you interact with don't even know what it is. So they'll stop you and ask what that is. This is 25 years ago or so. But now I suspect that this is very different. No matter where you are in the world, somebody knows something about project management and specifically PMI. I don't know if that experience translates well for you in Europe, if you've seen that as well. I've certainly experienced it in the US and in the Middle East regions.
I will add this because I think PMI has come a long way and it's gone through different stages of development. In the beginning of the 2000s, it was very, very strong, and then the statistics. We had a lot of statistics on who was certified, but very few statistics on membership. I remember a slogan that you don't hear that often anymore, and that was think global and act local. And I think what the real strength of PMI is not only the leadership of PMI, it's the chapters. And I think for a short time there, due to some conceptual strategies there, the importance of chapters kind of slipped to the background, membership kind of slipped off. But we're, with Pierre in our new leadership, that's changed. And he recently, in one of his posts, said something that I keep repeating. I said, yes, the recognition value of PMI is incredibly high, and it's a great way to start a conversation. But I think we all, especially us specialists who've been, so enamored and so involved in the global sphere and global communities, for every trained, obvious, certified project manager out there who claims to know what they're talking about, there are at least 100 other ones who've never heard of a standard, who've never heard of the PMBOK guide, who've never heard of IPMA, Prince 2, or PMI, or Scrum, or SHRUM, or whatever else you might want to call it. And I don't want to say, hey, we have to get them all on board, and we have to all convert them. They have to bow before the corporate identity of one of these organizations. No, but this is one thing that we used to do as a PMI chapter. You might find this funny. We were a small chapter back then when we started off, and I used to meet the big chapters, which was London and Frankfurt, right? And very great chapter president, Thomas Valenta, who's a fellow of PMI, and I forget who was in London, but it, and they were always very gracious and kind to the smaller chapters, but it was the basic entry to every conversation was, what chapter you're from and how many members do you have? And I used to love to piss them off. Not piss them off, but ruffle their feathers a little bit. And I would say, I don't know. And I don't care. They would look at me shocked, but isn't that the KPI that you use for value? I go, no. I said, why don't you ask me the relevant question? Okay. Why don't you ask me how many people I have in a database whose name I have there voluntarily, who've asked me to put them in the database, who I send emails to on a regular basis, who I invite to events on a regular basis, who get a newsletter from the PMI chapter. And they go, how many? I go, 5,700. And they were like, because they had membership of like 500, 700, maybe 1,000. I'm like, you think I'm peanuts? I'm telling you, if you just limit it to membership, that's peanuts. I think this is the beauty also of the true spirit of PMI. We love other associates and members, but I don't know a single hardcore PMI advocate from you or Lee or any of the other ones who aren't we just love our discipline, and we love people who are in our field of business, whether it's students, if it's CEOs, we don't make a difference. And I think that's what makes a difference. And I think that's what gives PMI such an uplift globally, is because we don't We have exclusive elements to our thing, but basically we're a gregarious, inclusive, loving organization. The more, the merrier, and that's what I love about PMI.
And certainly, passion is a major driver for a lot of people who are involved very heavily at a professional level, because they see the two intertwined, and eventually the colleagues that you meet and you interact with, many of them become your friends in your day-to-day interactions as well, don't they?
Yeah. I'll give you an example. I had you as PMI royalty on my podcast recently, and then shortly after you, I had Scott Ambler and Mark Lyons, who were the founders of Discipline Agile, and I was so thrilled that they condescended to come, just like you, to condescend to come onto my podcast, because we're not that famous yet, and they also are in that spirit. They're like, yeah, so what? We've been around the block. We might have more reputation, but they sense the equal desire and passion for the topic, and like I said, I think that's the beauty of it comes back to the concept of diversity and cultural inclusion. There's so much to learn and to share with one another. And I'm going to get philosophical. If we just learn to do that more often, the world would be a better place.
Yeah, one of the best chapters I belonged to, and probably one of the smallest, was the Baton Rouge chapter. And when you're talking about quality over quantity, our chapter meetings, the monthly chapter meetings, typically had about maybe 25, 30 people tops.
Yeah.
On most months, it was probably below 20. And when we met in this Chinese restaurant in Baton Rouge. I had to go up and take down the picture that's on the wall so that the projector can project the presentation.
That sounds fun.
One of the best chapters I was ever involved in terms of content, interactions, engagement. The people were there. It was super engagement, so it's not always about kind of appearances and fancy ballrooms and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit more about your professional journey. You mentioned that you started out, you were managing large IT projects. Talk us through that shift into consulting and training, and how would you compare that from a professional perspective? What are some of the advantages and disadvantages that you see? Because it is a very different world, even though it's in the same circles.
I will make one semantic note there. You said managing large projects. I was not the project leader or manager of the project. At a very early stage, and actually this is something that's followed me right from the beginning of my management career, is I've always pushed the envelope and tried to be involved in things where my feet were too small for the shoes I was trying to fill. But I realized very early that even if you're a junior, if you have the right mindset and the right skill set, you can contribute massively as a facilitator. The concept of facilitation, which is one of the most beautiful words in the English language, based on the French word facile or the Italian word facile, which means it's the magical principle of making something complex and difficult simpler. Okay. Giving ease to a process, overcoming conflict, creating collaboration, being that force that shapes. And that's often not the person who leads, because the leader has a different role, and they often rely on this facilitating role. I actually got into consulting. Let me one step back.
Let me pause here, because I think you made a very interesting point. Well, sometimes we forget about this in project management. We tend to focus a lot on the project managers and program managers, etc. But project management as a profession is very diverse and very rich in terms of the different roles. So you don't have to be a project manager and be in the profession. That's a very valuable point, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
And I don't know if you remember this, but it used to be when you applied for the PMP exam, they didn't ask you whether you were the project. There was only one word in the PMBOK, and that was project manager. And they said you are a project manager if you're on the field. So if you're in the playing field, if you're on a football field or on a soccer field, you're a soccer player or a football player, right? Which means anybody in the core team was considered a project manager. So from that semantic perspective, I've always been a manager, because you shape. Project management is not an individual sport; it's a team sport. And I love that concept, that hidden foundational concept. But since I speak German, In German, there were always two words. They took the English word project manager, and then they used the word Projektleiter, which means project leader. Okay.
Mhm.
And since Central Europe has kind of this classicistic, exclusive kind of thing, there's these and then there's theirs. They brought that concept in, and I actually believe that it's the Germans' fault that when you're applying for the PMP exam now, they expect you to have been the project leader or have some other
Mhm.
fancy name like that. And I'm going to go back to it. I'm a bigger fan of the more inclusive concept because I'm going to put it into perspective. If you're the facilitator of a 300 million euro project, or even less than that, I think you know more and do more in project management than a project leader of a 20,000 euro project. Would you agree?
I think that there's definitely a lot of truth to that in terms of the broader
Yeah.
experience that you gain.
Now, I will also say this: it doesn't make a difference how big your chapter is. Small is good, big is good. Small projects are good, big projects are good. But I think the inclusive part of it is important. Um, but you were asking me about the consulting thing. I
Yeah,
have been
yeah.
exposed in the larger projects to three of the big five. I won't name their names, but they were the big ones. Some of the ones that you hear in the news. Um, and um, and I was slightly impressed, but not fully impressed. I'll tell you what I was not well, I was impressed because of the way their stature and the way they came along. Power suits, power shoes, power watch, power slides, all that kind of stuff. I think that's where the word PowerPoint comes from. So that was kind of that 80s 90 vibe. How can I impress you? And what I was not impressed by were some, after being exposed to them for a long period of time. Actually, I will say one of the consulting firms that I dealt with or had to work with was one that had 100 participants in the project alone. They had one floor all to themselves, and they had everything from junior projects to senior partners there. Um, I learned a lot about what I think how a consulting company should be by the way they did it in a way that I wouldn't endorse. One, this is part of my iron or golden principle set for consultants. Consultants don't know more about your company than you do. Period. That's common sense. That's impossible. Can we, because we've seen so many similar contexts, do analogous or parametric advising? Yes. We have a wealth of knowledge and we fell on our face more often than others, so we can give advice. But a lot of people think, and a lot of these consulting firms believe, that their job is to come in there and to be haughty and kind of condescending and top down, tell the company what they need to do without really understanding the nuts and bolts of an organization. And I find that to be highly offensive. I think the actual power of a consultant, and this might sound strange, is to know very little about a client, but be engaged, be social, and ask lots of stupid questions. I think good consultants, and by the way, I will say this, I think project managers are the equivalent of a consultant within. They're the internal consultants.
Mhm.
Um, I think their job is to ask the right questions. That's the superpower of any manager is to ask the dumbest assumed user questions. And I always know if I've asked a good question when people lean back in their chairs, smile, and nudge each other and said, "Yeah, I had the same question in the back of my head, but I didn't dare ask it." Because some of these questions might sound simple and stupid, but they're the ones that need to be asked. Another phenomenon is if you're good at asking questions, I don't know, I've heard this at least 100 times from clients, who will ask me to come in to analyze their company, whether it's a maturity analysis or, trying to formulate strategy and everything or to define issues. I might need a week, I might need a month, but I'll often put together a report, and I'll give it to them. And the first thing they say after they read my report, they look at me and they say, "How do you know so much about our company?" I said, because I love hanging out in the coffee room, and I love to ask the people who don't like consultants why they don't like consultants and what's going on in the company, because they're willing to share, you know.
Mhm.
So that's the superpower of a consultant. And I don't know if I think it was you in one of your Substacks, kind of, or was it somebody else? I think it was somebody else who was recently ragging on consultants and was making these broad statements about consultants. Yeah, consultants suck because they're just good at PowerPoints. And I understood where the person was coming from because I know those consultants. But I was also offended for the rest of us because real consultants have skin in the game if they can. Real consultants don't just want to do a bunch of PowerPoints and get paid. They want to be involved. They want to help shape. They want to guide. They want to mentor. They want to do, they want to do follow-up loops with the team, and create a relationship that's not based on codependency, because you should actually create an environment where the client can work without you eventually. But I also say there's plenty of issues out there. There's plenty of work for us. If we create a good working relationship and you've done a good job on one thing, you're most likely to be called back. So that was kind of the principle. When I got interviewed to become a consultant, the first company that was a boutique company. They asked a boutique consulting company, a small company. Mm-hmm. They said, "Do you want to become a consultant?" I go, "No, I don't want to become a consultant." And they go, "Why not?" And I told them why. And then I said, "Well, can you conceive of a world where you would want to become a consultant?" I said, "Well, I'd love to be able to do more of what I do on a more powerful level, get more." I've always wanted to influence the board and the executives. Already when I was a junior, I always had an opinion, and I wanted to get it through to the board. And I said, that's a great thing about consultants. We talk to everything from the doorman to the CEO, bring it on. But I said I had two criteria to become a consultant besides asking stupid questions. So there's three. The second was I wanted to be on a first name basis with all my clients, which in Central Europe was a big deal back then. In the meantime, it's more common. They said, no, you have to use your title and you always have to wear a tie and a jacket. And like I said, if I have to do that to impress anybody, then I'm not a good consultant. And the last thing, which has been a functional mantra for me, and I pass it also on to all my project management peers, is the role of a good project manager and the role of a good consultant, if they're really worth their salt, is not to work on confirmation bias and regurgitate what everybody else is saying. AI is the future. I'm not saying that it's not, but some of that is hype. Agile is long live agile, predictive is dead. Good consultants and good project management have good rational thinking. And when we interact with stakeholders, we don't tell them what they want to hear. We tell them what we think they need to hear, because that's the true value of being a facilitator. When everybody else is telling you, you look great in your outfit, although you're naked, the consultant would say, maybe in a whisper, hey, if you like being naked, that's fine, but don't ask me what your outfit looks like, So that's kind of the role. And I think the real challenge of project management and consultants is to find that balance between thinking outside the box, saying it as it is, being honest with the facts, working with transparency, embracing the consequences of that recognition, and have patience and diplomacy until a client. And there's a wonderful quote from Konrad Lorenz, which was an Austrian zoologist. And you might say, what does an Austrian zoologist know about project management? Nothing. But his quote should be tattooed on every project management's forearm or framed on their desk. And the quote goes like this: thought is not the same thing as said. There's so much we think, and then we think that, by osmosis, people will know what we're thinking, Second part of it is, said is not heard. How often do we hear slogans and do this and do that, and people, it's not heard. We send 100 emails, but we're surprised the message doesn't get across. So said is not heard. Heard is not understood. And that's where we get back to that principle of asking the stupid questions. Everybody hates to be the one who admits, I finally heard you, but I have no idea what you mean. Can you explain it? And there's a wonderful saying in German that says, explain it to me like I'm a 7-year-old, a housewife, a houseman, or a board member, because they all more or less have the same attention deficit disorder and the same attention span. So, and that's the beauty. So heard is not understood, and then understood is not agreed upon, which is the conflict part of it, and agreed upon is not yet done. And if you look at those 5 different steps, what I call hurdles of communication, it explains in a very ethereal and kind of holistic way what the whole project management process is about, is bringing people together and facilitating effective and efficient communication. That's what it's all about.
These are some great nuggets of wisdom. I hope that
Thank you.
people who join the podcast are able to kind of take notes on them. Honestly, I mean, that was fantastic. As we wrap things up, and I love the mention about asking stupid questions, I would not push back, but add that it's a lot easier when you've got the experience and the confidence to feel
For the
comfortable
stupidity.
asking questions. Rather than
You can figure out which one I am.
I do want to give you an opportunity as we close here. If there's any advice that you want to share with someone who is interested in getting into the project management career path, regardless of age or background, but what are some things that they can do to get ramped up quickly and start delivering value in the profession?
I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey was the first bit of literature that I was given as a mandatory reading when I was a manager in the United States, and it really did well for me. I remember the first couple times I read it was like, oh, yeah, who needs this? But the more I read it, and even now I still enjoy reading it, it's a good principle framework for everything around management, in particular around project management. So if I were to give a young person advice, read 7 Habits. The 7 Habits are summarize a lot of what we do. Be proactive. Okay, first step, right? Begin with the end in mind, which means know how to define a project charter or identify where you're going. Number 3, first things first. The day is too long to be able to do everything you want to do. So if you can't set priorities, you're screwed, right? If you can't focus on what's important, if you can't do minimum viable product, and that's just personal capabilities. And then if you go to the ability to actually work in teams, we look at the next 3 habits, which is see if I should know these by heart. Listen, understand and then be understood is one of them. What's in it for the other people? Understand what motivates other people, and then synergize, which means the ability to collaborate. And then the thing that kind of all ties it together is the classical sharpening the saw, which is another word for continuous education. You can see this is not a fake wall back here. I haven't read them all, but I'm still working on it. It's in my life project. I've read about 70% of it. No matter, and I think you will agree with me, Philip. I think this is a paradox. We've learned a lot, but we haven't learned everything, and we're still young children at heart when it comes to being open to new ideas. If we might, because we're more experienced, be a little bit more critical of some of the BS that goes along with it. But so that's a great place to start for a young manager. And then the other book that also from Stephen Covey that I love and we don't talk about enough is called Principle-Based Leadership, which means know what's important to you and live by them. And some of these things that I said, say what people need to hear, not what they want to hear. That's a principle. It guides you. When you don't know what to do in life, that's what's going to help you. Ask stupid questions when nobody else dares to ask a stupid question. It's a principle. And these are gold nuggets that will, even in absence of profound experienced knowledge, will guide you along the way. They'll be like little beacons of light that'll give you confidence and guide you along the way. So that's what I would probably tell a young project manager.
One of the things that I like about sharpening the saw is that what we're doing right now, in effect, is sharpening the saw, because we are interacting, but we're learning from each other. I can definitely, from my end, I'm learning from every interaction, and I appreciate the nuggets of wisdom that you've shared here.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast with me. I really enjoyed our conversation. This is not going to be the last time, I'm sure. So we'll have an opportunity to continue the interaction in the future. So thanks for being here.
I was honored to be your guest and hopefully be able to contribute back to your platform just as much as you contribute to our platform, which is also a form of creating synergy. So I look forward also to future conversations.
Great. Well, again, thank you all for joining us. This is Philip Diab for Project Management Matters. Until next time. Goodbye.